It is hard to believe, but we are back for our 10th episode of Nole Your Enemy as FSU 6-3 and 23rd ranked in the college football playoff rankings gets ready to travel to New York State to take on the 6-3 Syracuse Orange on Saturday night in what used to be the Carrier Dome. I'm not sure exactly what they call it today. But we're fixing to be told. Our guest today is Brent Axe from Syracuse.com and ESPN Radio Syracuse. And Brent, just want to thank you for joining us. I know it's a busy week for you guys, and thank you for taking the time out.
My pleasure, Patrick. Two things. Number one, the name of the show is spectacular. You know, like as soon as I heard the name of the show, yes is the answer. I'm in. I don't even care what it's about. I'm like, I will go on a show called Nole Your Enemy. Yeah. Two, I still call it the Carrier Dome all the time. It's technically now the JMA Wireless Dome. JMA Wireless actually, is a leading 5G company in the world. It's based in Syracuse. It's really cool. They, a lot of people around here are excited about what they're doing, but I say Carrier Dome 5 times a week, and it's going to take a while to get that new name on the brain for sure. Yeah, well, I was on staff at University of South Florida for 7 years, and of course, we played you guys every year, and so I've had at least 3 trips, maybe 4 up there. It's a unique place to play. There's no doubt about that, and I'll get your thoughts on that later. And of course, the irony to me, and I don't know that I think most people know this now, but back when we were playing you guys in the early 2000s and 2000 teens, the Carrier Dome did not have AC. No, it didn't. And now it does. And it's not named after an air conditioning company anymore, right?
Yeah, that was always funny to me. But anyway, it's kind of funny the way the wind blows through that place, or used to blow through that place. You would open the door and it would slam shut. I mean, it was like
that's right.
It was a vacuum. But anyway, it's a neat place, an interesting place to play, and something that Florida State will have to deal with. But we'll talk a little bit about Florida State down the road. But listen, the reason we're on is because you are a Syracuse subject matter expert. And, listen, not a lot was thought about this team coming into this year. But obviously they go on a 6-game winning streak to start the year. Were the story of the ACC up until 3 weeks ago. Then, of course, like Florida State, have gone through a 3-game losing streak. Brent, just talk a little bit about what your expectations were coming into this season for this Syracuse team and where they are now, and kind of what the temperature and the lay of the land is up in New York State in week 10.
Yeah, coming into the year, everybody kind of made like a gentleman's agreement. Like if they win 6 games and go to a bowl game, like everybody's cool with that. You get another year of Dino Babers. Don't give them a long-term contract extension like they did after their 2018 season. But like everybody had to agree on that, right? Like that's a sign of progress. And then they win their first 6 games. And it's like, well, hold on a second here. Maybe the expectations raise a little bit. Maybe it's beyond that. But Dino's certainly off the hot seat. The athletic director, John Wildhack, Patrick, this is back in June, as a matter of fact, unprompted at a press conference, said that Dino's not on the hot seat. Like he tried to get ahead of all this. And he put his bet on Dino there. And it paid off in a sense. I mean, no matter what happens the rest of the year, they're going to a bowl game. Now, what bowl game that is, we shall see. So it's been a little interesting, though, these past 3 losses, because once Syracuse played teams that, clearly are more physical than they are, Clemson, Notre Dame, with more talent, all the 5-star guys and everything that we talk about in college football. I mean, they got pushed around a little bit, and injuries are starting to pile up. Pittsburgh was just a bad loss. Pitt is a team that's owned Syracuse over the years, but they didn't even have their best player. Izzy Abanikanda was out of that game, and Syracuse just got dominated. And that offense fell apart. They didn't have their starters. We'll talk about Garrett Shrader wasn't in. Right. And so all of a sudden, people are now like, okay, well, 6-3 is cool, but what do we make of this team? And there's 3 games to go, and they're all tough games, including this one this week at the Dome against Florida State. So everybody's like, yeah, we're going to a bowl game, but hey, like, what's going on here? We thought this team could win 10 games. Now they'll be lucky to win 7, it seems like.
Yeah, well, listen, obviously Shrader was out. I want to talk to you a little bit about him because he's been a fascinating story this year. Probably the most improved passer in the ACC from a season ago. But, what has been the difference outside of Shrader missing the Pitt game? Obviously, competition got better. Florida State went through the same thing, but Clemson was on that part of the schedule when they went through their 3-game loss. That's another commonality. But what has been the difference outside of Shrader in the 3-game losing streak for Syracuse?
I think injuries are a factor, to be fair. Okay. Syracuse doesn't have the depth that some other teams do there. I mean, their defensive line's been decimated. They lost Garrett Williams, who is an NFL-level cornerback. That's been big. And it's just been like, slowly but surely every week, Dino's talking about a player that's out for the year. I think they played 3 teams that can really run the football, another one this week with Florida State. So I'm really wondering what they're going to do about that. And it's just that war of attrition that piles up. Not having Shrader out there was big. Carlos Del Rio Wilson, the backup quarterback, he's a talented kid. He's got a big arm, came from Florida. I think he's going to be good down the road, but he just, there was too much on his plate last week, right? The other thing, Patrick, is mysteriously this team, the last 2 out of the last 3 games, has forgotten to have an All-American running back in Sean Tucker. And it's just annoying, frankly, that they have not given him the ball more. Now, to be fair, he hasn't been 100% for a good part of the season.
Right.
But he is now. Right. I asked Dino flat out this week at his press conference.
I watched that.
I heard an injury.
Yeah, I heard the question. Yeah.
So you heard it. And, Dino, who you got to admire his honesty, he says, well, Brent, I wouldn't tell you anyway, but I'll say this. He's our starting running back and he's 100% healthy. So hopefully they get back to, a steady diet of Sean Tucker. Frankly, they need to keep other teams off the field. And, I'm really interested to see what they do going down the stretch here, as we mentioned, with these injuries and how they handle it.
Yeah, he has. I've watched several games that you guys have played, and he has looked beat up at times. I mean, just nothing serious. Just, it looks like maybe an ankle here that's sore, something like that. Now, you said injuries. Obviously, Garrett Shrader was held out last week. He did go through pregame warmups. I heard Coach Babers talking about that in his press conference this week, and they ultimately decided not to go with him. Listen, he's listed on the 2 deep. We all know that 2 deeps don't mean anything anymore. We see that every week down here. There's a bunch of Fabian Lovett was listed as a starter the entire season, played in game 1, then didn't come back till game 7 or 8. But do you expect Garrett Shrader to play?
I do. Expect him to play, because Carlos Del Rio Wilson was just overwhelmed. Shrader's got, it's the same thing as Tucker. He's got a lower body injury, as coaches like to say. It's an ankle injury. Dino would not confirm that with me. Dino's got an expression up here. You saw it if you watched it, Patrick. He calls injuries owies.
I did hear that. Yeah. It struck me as funny. A bit odd, but that's okay.
And owies is code for you can play through that. It's that great line from, I forget what movie it was. I think it was The Program, when James Caan's like, are you hurt or are you injured? If you're hurt, you can play. If you're injured, I got to take you out. So Shrader's hurt. He's had an ankle injury all year. He's had to wear a boot at times, and he's played through it. But Shrader is at his best when he's mobile, when he can not only run with the football, but he can throw on the run. He went through pregame warmups last week and just did not look good, and they made the call to take him out.
Yeah.
I think even just resting him that one game will help. I think they need him out there. I think they need his presence out there. I think they just need their quarterback back, and being back at home, I think is big there. So I do anticipate we're going to see Shrader with Carlos Del Rio Wilson ready to complement him if that ankle flares up. But they need their quarterback back. They need their offense to get back to as close to 100% as they can. So I do expect to see him this week.
Well, and Shrader's, what he was really good at last year was running the ball, was not terribly effective as a passer, 53% for the year. But certainly, whether it was the addition of offensive coordinator Robert Anae or the continued development of the offensive line, which I want to talk to you a little bit about as we get into it. But he is a 67% passer this season. Has already passed for more yards on less attempts than he did last year. What has kind of been what led to that development? Is it a Robert Anae thing? Is it the offensive line and complementary play from Sean Tucker? What have you seen in Garrett Shrader that's led to this improvement?
It's a few things, Patrick. One is, you got to remember last year, he came in game 4. He took over for Tommy DeVito, who, by the way, is having a great season in Illinois this year.
Yes, he is.
And guys, that worked out better for everybody. Garrett's where he needs to be and Tommy's where he needs to be, but that's a whole different topic for a different day. So in the offseason, Robert and there's another name we got to throw in the mix here. That's Jason Beck, Syracuse's new quarterback coach. They tailored this offense to Garrett and what he can do. So it was his offense from the get-go. That was number one. Number two is Oronde Gadsden has emerged as a top target in this offense. And I've been screaming for years, Patrick, for Syracuse to throw the ball to the tight end more. I don't understand why they haven't done it. Gadsden's not a traditional tight end, but we'll take it, in that position. So he's got a true target, number one. The offensive line play has improved. There's a little bugaboo with the offensive line in that they pick up about anywhere from 4 to 6, procedure penalties a game. Syracuse is one of the highest rated penalized teams in the country. And a lot of that centers in on the offensive line. But I just think Shrader's been put in a position where he's free to take off and run when he wants. They have tightened the offense to what he is good at. He always could throw the ball. And the other thing I should mention, Patrick, is he was hurt at the end of last year. He had a shoulder issue, which limited how much he threw the ball and how he could throw the ball. He's healthy upper body wise this year. We talked about the ankle injury that's nagged him, but he's not been nagged by an injury to his throwing shoulder as he had last year.
Well, listen, you mentioned that, they've kind of tightened up on offense, and kind of leads me to my next question. When I say Syracuse is not overly complicated in offense, I don't mean it that schematically. I mean that who's getting the ball in the run game. It's going to either be Tucker or Shrader. They account for 82% of the team's rush yards. No one has over 24 carries outside of those two, and that was Carlos Del Rio Wilson, who got most of those last week. So how have they been effective, even though people know we got to tackle 34, we got to tackle 6, and nobody else is getting the ball?
Well, the big thing they've done, Patrick, is even though who's getting the ball, a lot of times Tucker will split out wide. There's a lot more pre-snap motion in this offense this year under Robert than there was in previous years. So you got to account for both of them. So when Tucker splits out or Tucker's moving before the snap, you've got to know where he is. And that opens up a lane for Shrader, right? Schrader's gotten very good in the RPO game, making decisions on when to tuck and run or whether to give the ball to Tucker or, just decide what to do in terms of throwing the football. The issue is they're the only two running the ball. Okay, you've got LaQuint Allen, who's a freshman running back. He's barely been on the field. They brought in Juwan Howard, who's a transfer from New Mexico State. We've barely seen him too. And beyond Gadsden in the throw game, it's been limited. There's a little bit of Damian Alford here. He tends to make one big catch a game. A little bit of Courtney Jackson, who was their leading receiver last year and has just disappeared on the field this year. And a couple other guys that DeMarcus Adams has made some plays, a little bit here and there. So here we are going into game, 9-10 of the season, and Syracuse still doesn't have a true number 2 target. No. Now, it took until last week, Patrick, before somebody actually shut down Gadsden. I mean, Pitt took him out of the game, and I think a lot of that had to do with the new quarterback that was out there too, honestly. But Syracuse has got to find some other guys in this offense, and it's not like they're not there. They've got some talented players. It's just Gadsden was so good and was always hoping you had to throw him the ball in the first part of the season. But now there's enough film out there, and I think teams are starting to figure out how at least to slow him down.
Yeah, to just give our viewers and listeners a little bit about what you're talking about. Oronde Gadsden Jr., who is the son of Oronde Gadsden, the former Miami Dolphins, I believe, defensive back. But he's huge. He's 6'5", about 220. He kind of reminds you more of a Kyle. And listen, people are going to go crazy when I say this. He's more Kyle Pitts-like than he is tight end-like.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great way to put it. That's a great way to put it. And Atlanta took a while to throw him the ball, but I'm not comparing Gadsden to these names, but like a Travis Kelce, Cooper Kupp, the dude's always open. Even though he's not hard to spot out there, it's not like he's sneaking out there. He's the biggest dude on the offense, but he just gets open. And he's been one of the breakout players in not only Syracuse, but in the ACC this year.
Yeah, and to your point, Sean Tucker is the second leading receiver on the team with 34 catches. The next highest is Devon Cooper with 19, and just keeps on going down from there. I want to go back. Sean Tucker, listen, Syracuse has a great history of running backs, and I'm not comparing him to Jim Brown or anything like that. But, listen, he's a very good, well-rounded player. just how good do you think he is? I he's 34th in the nation in rushing yards. I think he might be one of the best backs in all of college football, let alone the ACC.
No question about it. And, if you want to compare him to somebody historically, Joe Morris is a great comparison.
Okay.
The former New York Giant, Sean actually broke Joe Morris's record here at Syracuse for single season rushing yards a year ago. And now that he's finally getting back healthy, the thing with Tucker is second level, he can shake and bake you at the line. And if he gets second level, he's gone. Now, my colleague at Syracuse.com, Emily Leiker, wrote a great story about this today that I would encourage your readers and listeners and viewers here to check out. The explosive plays aren't quite there. But a lot of that's been for whatever reason. The Clemson game, he only got 5 carries, which was just ridiculous. And then this past game, he only got 10 carries. Right. So I think Robert and I and Dino Babers have just gotten away from what Tucker is. I think what's happening is they're anticipating the anticipation, if that makes sense. Like they're coming into every game thinking, okay, these teams are going to key in on Tucker. So we got to figure out ways around that. Just give him the ball. And if teams stop him, right? So the thing with Tucker is, I mentioned it a moment ago, you cannot let him get second level or he's just going to torch you, right? He doesn't have the speed that he had last year because the injuries that we mentioned, but he's just a complete package at running back. He's hard to tackle. He slips through holes. He's just I think he's going to be gone after this year. And I think, even though running backs are not quite at the premium they usually are, he'll definitely get drafted if he jumps to the next level in the 2023 draft, which I think he's going to.
Now, is he a guy that you think if Dino would feed him the ball 20, 25 times a game could take over a game by himself?
No question about it. No question about it. And I love the element of – now, he actually was their leading receiver last year. That was kind of by default, though, because they didn't have a strong passing game, as we noted. But I like the way they're using him in the passing game this year. It's not just getting him in those swing passes and letting him, get chunk yards. When he – lines up, you can see other defenses like pointing and saying, oh boy, go follow that guy, right? So they've used that to their advantage at times this year to open things up for Shrader. But again, the trick there is Shrader hasn't been healthy and hasn't been able to take off and run as much. So Tucker's the ultimate weapon, and he has made big improvements in the passing game. Last year, he caught a lot of passes, but he wasn't quite as effective, if that makes sense. This year, he's actually a weapon in the passing game.
Well, and now I want to talk about the guys that are clearing the holes for both Shrader and Tucker. The offensive line, if we went back to that Syracuse versus Florida State game 2 years ago, which I think was here at Florida State, I think it was the COVID. Actually they didn't play. So let's go back to 2019, which I think all right, it was two of the worst offensive lines I've ever seen in one single ball game. I mean, nobody could block. Both teams have come a long way in that department. Florida State's one of the best big play offenses, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into Syracuse defense. But this starting five has 139 career starts. Just talk a little bit about their strengths and weaknesses. They have three players with, I believe, over 30 starts, and both tackles and the center, Carlos Veterola, who's got 40 career starts. But just talk a little bit about their development and success in this offense.
Well, that's been the big thing, is experience and health. They've been the same offensive line. Now, just this recent past couple of weeks, Kalen Ellis has been a little banged up and hasn't been able to play, and that's big. Big is a word. Syracuse finally has a few players that are over 300 pounds on this offensive line. We brought up Tommy DeVito earlier. That's what chased Tommy DeVito out of here, is that offensive line in 2019 and 2020 gave up more sacks than anybody in the country. Now you've got an offensive line that's not only experienced, has size, but has a great left tackle. Matthew Bergeron is getting serious NFL buzz. I've even seen some Matt Miller from ESPN, a couple other scouts have him as a first-round grade right now. Jim Nagy, who runs the Senior Bowl, is really high on Burge, and he has been terrific. He has made that difference and given Shrader, the confidence that he's got somebody on his blind side that's going to give him time to throw the football, right? I think the scheme has helped. They're getting rid of the ball quicker, which helps this offensive line. And, when you got a running back like Tucker that can take the slightest little hole and take advantage of it, that's been big. But the biggest thing with this line, it's just been consistency. It's the same guys left to right. there's a lot of experience on this line. I'm kind of wondering what's going to happen once a bunch of these guys leave. And, next year, what Syracuse is going to do there, that's going to be, something they've got to hit hard in the transfer portal, in my opinion. Yeah. But it's just been consistency, size, and scheme that have helped them, really maximize what they can be.
Yeah. Well, listen, let's flip it over to the other side. Syracuse has a very good defense. They run a 3-3-5 base defense. A lot of playmakers on that defense. Two really good Mikel Jones, I think one of the best linebackers in the ACC. And then they've got a young kid named Marlo Wax that's been highly productive. But listen, this is Florida State's a team that is one of the best teams in the nation at producing chunk plays, runs over 10 yards, passes over 20. But Syracuse is also one of the best defenses in not allowing them 40th in runs given up over 10 yards and first in pass plays over 20. They just don't give them up. And that's where Florida State has made most of its hay in the pass game, is plays over 20 yards. Just talk about the Syracuse defense, how the characteristics of what Tony White does, the defensive coordinator, and how you think they match up against Florida State's offense.
Well, I love Tony White's defense generally. I love the infusion of energy it's brought. Syracuse is back to getting a lot of takeaways this year. It was just weird last year. They didn't have a ton last season, but they're getting better taking away the ball. But I think our worst fears of the defense have come true up front. There's been a lot of injuries up there. Jatius Gear in last week's game. Now, he might play this week, but he's not 100%. Terry Lockett's out. There's just a number of guys. They were young and inexperienced anyway. And now that defensive line's banged up. Caleb Okechukwu is a great player up front, though. He's got a great podcast, by the way, the Mob Podcast, as they call it. He and Marlo Wax and a couple of guys do a great podcast every week. So check that out if you want the player perspective. But you mentioned a couple of names there, Mikel Jones and Marlo Wax. To me, they're 1 and 1A now. Like, Mikel Jones is an NFL-level talent and is one of the best in the ACC. Marlo Wax is right there with him. My concern this week from a Syracuse perspective, Patrick, is how are they going to stop these chunk plays in the run? Because someone's got to spy Jordan Travis, right? So that takes either Mikel or Marlo out of the mix. And now if you're getting into that second level, we mentioned Garrett Williams is out. Now, Deuce Chestnut is a terrific lockdown cornerback for the Orange, so he can handle that. Isaiah Johnson, a senior, has stepped in and played well. Jihad Carter, a safety, has had interceptions in 3 straight games, so he's an emerging star. So there's a lot of talent there, and Tony White's 3-3-5 makes you think it puts a lot of pressure on you. But as we've seen the last few weeks, they can't stop the run. And if you've got a mobile quarterback, that gives a 3-3-5 absolute fits.
Yep.
So, man, I'm as curious as anybody how they balance this out, because you got to pick your poison. It was like when they played Clemson, right? You got to pick your poison. You either go after DJ Uiagalelei and live with what Will Shipley does, or vice versa. And it actually worked. They knocked DJ out of the game. Will Shipley torched him, but they stayed in that game for other reasons. I feel like that's what they got to do against Florida State this week. They basically have to make a choice. Do you put everything into stopping Jordan Travis and just kind of, weather the storm as best as you can with the running game, or vice versa? And honestly, I think the choice is stop Travis and live with the running game, because they haven't been able to do that the past few weeks.
Well, listen, obviously they're very good in pass defense at Syracuse, 6th in the nation in yards allowed passing per game. And when I started doing my research, obviously I knew Garrett Williams. I knew that he was one of their veteran players, obviously out for at least this game, if not the season. But when I started going through the 2 deep, still a young secondary,
sure.
Which is promising if you're a Syracuse fan. But what about Tony White's defense has allowed them to be so successful in the backfield, covering the pass?
I think because it makes you think. They're constantly moving around. They're constantly subbing. There's people in places they shouldn't be. 3-3-5 it's almost like Jim Boeheim's 2-3 zone in basketball. You can watch film all day, but until you get out there and see it with your own eyes and have to play it, it's tough. It is tough to prepare for and adjust to. So you're adjusting as the game is going, right? And linebackers look like secondary. Secondary looks like linebackers. They're constantly moving around and being put in places. And it's what we talked about. So when you had Garrett and Deuce as 2 lockdown corners, that opens up a Mikel Jones, who's great in pass coverage, Marlo Wax to focus in on certain things. But now that they're thinning out a little bit, I mentioned a couple players have stepped up, namely Jihad Carter, but they're a little more vulnerable because of what Mikkel and Marlowe Axe have to occupy and where they have to be. Like you can find soft spots in that zone to get at them a little bit. So the theory of the 3-3-5 is it doesn't allow you to play. You're thinking too much. And if you can get past that and just go right at it and find a way to play against it, then things even out.
It kind of reminds me of the old Joe Lee Dunn Mississippi State defenses from back in the mid 90s to late 90s, where the people lined up everywhere. Sometimes you'd see two guys in the A gap and nobody else on the front of the line except at the ends, right? But listen, as I went through it, you mentioned Caleb, and I can't pronounce his last name, but highly productive year. He's fifth or sixth on the team with 33 tackles, leads his team in tackles for sacks, and I believe second or third on the team in tackles for losses with 6.5. Now, you mentioned the injuries. If you just look at and of course, I bring this up because they were talking about him in the Clemson Syracuse broadcast, but the nose guard, Kevin Darton, undersized guy in every way, not tall enough, but he's third on the team in tackles from the nose guard position. I don't think people understand. Now, I know some of that's because there's been some attrition on the defensive front, but just talk about him. I mean, he's kind of a fun guy to watch.
Oh, he's a great story because you said it. He is. He walks in the room we do interviews up here on Tuesdays with the players. He walks in the room and then you got to be sure, are you a football player? Or are you part of the staff that's helping out at practice? Right. But man, this kid's got a motor. He's tough. He's always in the right place at the right time. I think what he, lacks in size and traditional nose tackle size, he makes up for he's smart. He knows exactly where to be. He's always around the ball, and he's just got that small guy motor. Everybody's talking to him about how tiny he is, and you shouldn't be out there. And he's just like, yeah, whatever. I'm going to go out there and just be where I need to be. And he's strong. He's just one of those guys when you talk to him, and at first you kind of look at him and you don't think he's a nose tackle, but then when you settle in and you're having a conversation with him, the dude is just solid, right? He's just bam. Yeah. So I'm glad you brought him up because he has really stepped up for this team, and he's a great story. Former walk-on, worked his way into scholarship play, and just a great reminder that sizes and everything in football. It helps, but sometimes you get the right guy that can overcome that and make a difference.
Yeah, listen, it is an interesting story, and that's the one great thing about college football is you do get those stories every now and then. And I'm actually glad I got to see what was watching the game when they did that segment, on which actually he got a little bit banged up right after they started talking about him in that game, and came out for a play or two before he went back in. Just talk a little bit about the kicking game. Obviously, you have I believe a former Lou Groza Award winner as your place kicker, and Schmitz. What kind of season is he having, and how aggressive has Syracuse been in the return game, both punting and kickoff returns?
Well, the big thing with special teams is Bob Ligashevsky came in this year. Syracuse did not have a dedicated special teams coach in the past. They do now. Ligashevsky, who NFL experience, he won a Super Bowl with the Steelers, really tighten things down because special teams was a disaster last year, frankly. A lot of penalties, a lot of disorganization. Andre Schmidt was just not the same guy. And I remember talking to Schmidt during camp and just brought it up. I'm like, what's it like having a special teams coach dedicated to you guys? And you could just see the weight lifted off him and the smile on his face, right? Because somebody was paying attention to special teams as opposed to the by committee they did last year. So Schmidt's been as sharp as ever. He had a 49-yarder last week. And once you get around 50 yards, it gets dicey. But the college kickers, right? But like you said, a Lou Groza Award winner. He's as consistent as can be. Syracuse's punting game has hit a little bit of a snag. Now they've got Max von Warburg in there from, I believe I'm saying this right, Walla Walla, Australia. Okay. Comes in, former Aussie Rules football player, adjusting to the American game, right?
Yep.
And he's been pretty good, but he's had some kicks in the last few games, a couple off the side of his foot, and I think he's struggling a little bit. Trevor Pena can be great in the return game. We haven't seen it to the point where he's been great. He's been, as Dino Babers would say, he's been consistently good in that department. He's a threat. He could always take one. So I would give special teams a solid B+ this year.
Okay.
But like I said, the past couple of games, there's been a couple of issues there with Max, and we're keeping an eye on that. He hasn't been able to quite flip the field as much as we thought. And Syracuse has had some great punters in recent years. You know, Riley Dixon, Sterling Hoff-Richter have gone to the National Football League. Rob Long was a terrific punter. So there's actually a lineage there that Syracuse, you mentioned the running backs, they've been actually really good at the punter position. And I think Max could get there, but they're, he's young and he's making the adjustments. We got to see if he can kind of fill into that role.
Yeah, I wonder how many games in college football have featured 2 punters from Australia, because that's what we will have on Saturday night in what used to be the Carrier Dome in Syracuse. Listen, I think it's a huge game. I want to ask you this: both teams are 6-3, and we were having this conversation on our postseason show. Neither team's going to obviously win their division. Do you think players today, take into account that, hey, if we go 9-3 versus 7-5, that we may end up in San Diego or Orlando as opposed to New York City or Charlotte, North Carolina?
I don't think so. I feel like I'll use Mikel Jones as an example, because he could have gone to the NFL. Garrett Williams could have gone to the NFL. Andre Schmidt could have gone to the NFL. And one of the reasons that those guys mentioned that they all came back was to go to a bowl game. Okay. They didn't say a specific bowl game. They didn't say, no, I'd probably rather go to San Diego than, play in Fenway Park in late December, right? I think they just want that experience to know that and it's not just to play in a bowl game. I think it's the symbolism of, we brought Syracuse back, right? 2018, they have this amazing season, win 10 games, go to the Camping World Bowl, which is now, I believe, the Cheez-It Bowl, right? And it just slid from there. 5-7 in 2019, terrible year in 2020. They got decimated by injuries, and of course, they were dealing with COVID. They went 1-10, and then 2021, they get 5 wins, and they get right there. So they want that feeling of not only going to a bowl game, but to walk out of here saying, hey, we brought Syracuse back to where it needs to be.
Yeah. Well, listen, I do think with the youth on defense, I don't think there's very many seniors on your defense at all. I think maybe one, if I'm right. But anyway, impressive young defense. Listen, I do want to ask you about this because I went crazy during the game. How much backlash was there over the non-call timeout or waiting 30 seconds to call a timeout against Clemson? Listen, we've seen him. Dino, he seems like a great guy. He's always fun to listen to talk. He's got a great reputation within the industry, but he's made some baffling decisions in game management. Just talk about the reaction after the Clemson game to that particular.
I will give him credit, Patrick. He came to that press conference after that Clemson game, and before even got to the questions. Now, Dino typically comes to his press conference. He'll give kind of a generic opening statement. Yeah, we got a tough team this week, just kind of coach speak. Right. Then he'll open it up to questions. That press conference, he spent a good 3 or 4 minutes in kind of an opening monologue. He owned that, the time management thing, said that can't happen. He owned the fact that they only gave Tucker 5 carries in that game, and then they only gave him 10 last week. So he kind of forgot about how strongly he worded that. But this has been an issue, Patrick. Time management under Dino Babers. It's just been a consistent thing. End of half, use of timeouts. And in that one, he just froze and let 30 seconds tick off the clock when it was just like instant, boom, timeout, give yourself time to which Syracuse almost did, drive down the field and score, by the way. But he just has these mental lapses, and I don't get it. When you got 4 guys in the headset, somebody's got to be screaming, take a timeout, right? So,
they all have
weakness in his game.
They all have their analytical guys sitting on the sideline with some big notebook. I've seen it every game. Not just Syracuse, but I was watching a game Saturday, and the same guy, I can't remember what school it was, but every time I watch him on television, he's got the notebook and he follows the head coach wherever the coach goes, and that's his job.
Syracuse has one of those guys, by the way, so I don't know what he was doing either.
Yeah, it's that whole analytics, when to call timeout, when to go for a 4th down. That's all fascinating to me. All right, so just kind of your general feel. I'm not going to ask you for a prediction, but just kind of your general feel for this game. When you cover a team closely, you kind of get a sense of if they're ready, if they're not ready. We thought Florida State, our sense of things after following them for 4 years, this was going to be a better year for them. Turns out our sense of things was right. But kind of what's your sense of things going into this game?
Well, I think being at home is really going to help. The Dome crowds have been incredible this year. They've been loud. They've had back-to-back sellouts. I haven't looked honestly yet to see how ticket sales are going for this one, but it doesn't matter. Even if there's, only 40,000 people in there, it is loud in that building. And the students have been amazing this year. The crowds have been great. So that's going to be a factor. I feel like Shrader coming back, even if it's only, 75% Garrett Shrader is going to help. I think Tucker gets the ball a lot. It's just weathering the storm on that defense because they're not going to stop the run. They haven't proven they can do that. They've given up 700 yards rushing the last 3 games. That's not all of a sudden going to stop against this team. No. So I think their best defense is their offense. Just weather the storm as best you can. Syracuse had a great red zone defense this year, so that's got to keep up. The red zone offense has been great. I think you got to open it back up, be aggressive on offense, and it will benefit Syracuse to be in more of a shootout type of game because they've proven the last 3 weeks they can't be in a grinder. Now they should have beaten Pittsburgh last week, and that was as grindy as it gets, if I can make up a term, right? Yeah. But I don't see this game going that way. Boy, I don't want to make a prediction because I've just been wrong. Yeah, I've just been wrong about this team the past few weeks. But I will say this, Patrick. I think they will play a lot better this week than they did against Pittsburgh.
All right, now we will probably see some. Y'all will probably see some Seminoles running around Syracuse on Friday and Saturday. If they can get up there. Obviously, the storm's headed y'all's way, and I don't know how many flights that will affect. But listen, where would be some places you would recommend for Florida State people to spend some of their free time when they get into Syracuse, either restaurants, bars, points of interest around the city?
Oh, man. Okay, so here's my advice. Explore a little bit, okay? Central New York, you're 20 minutes from everything. Like downtown Syracuse is great. So if you're in downtown, few places. Possibilities, Dinosaur Barbecue. That's the icon here. Everybody that visits Syracuse, you got to go to Dinosaur once. So there's a couple of places there. But Central New York it's beautiful. A lot of the leaves have fallen off the trees, but the fall up here is amazing. Explore. Go to Skinny Atlas. Okay, Skinny Atlas is a town about 15 minutes west of downtown, probably about 20 minutes west of downtown Syracuse. Beautiful lake, beautiful little town. Doug's Fish Fry is the spot in Skinny Atlas, okay? Heritage Hill Brew House is a place I will recommend. It's about 15 minutes outside downtown Syracuse. It is the best view you will ever see of Central New York. The beer is amazing. The barbecue is amazing. It's actually a working farm.
Okay.
And it's a great place to go and hang out before the game. That's where Dino Babers actually does his radio show every Thursday. So I recommend that. Boy, it depends on what you're looking at. If you want Italian food, I mentioned Possibilities. Delmonico's on Erie Boulevard is a place to go. I'm going to leave somebody out here. So don't be afraid, guys. Hit me on Twitter, Brent Axe Media, Florida State fans. If you're coming up, if you're looking for a specific recommendation, I would love to help you out.
Well, let me ask you this. When we played, when there was a game, and it used to be a truck that serves sandwiches right outside the stadium. And I don't know. We actually did our post-game meal from that truck one year. They were. I don't know where they called it.
What it was. Was it Tossed and Fire Pizza? Maybe.
Shoot! I wish I could try. I was hoping you would be able to spark my memory. Anyway, it was pretty cool. There, apparently, it's a well-known sub grinder, whatever you want. I want to say it was chicken parm.
I wonder which one that was.
A chicken parm sandwich, but it was on sub bread. And anyway, it was supposed to be a well-known place in Syracuse, which is why we ordered it for the players after the game. Anyway, listen, it's a neat place. I've been up there several times. I hope our Seminole fans will enjoy their trip up there. It's unlike most of the cities that we travel to in the ACC. But Brent, just tell our subscribers and listeners how they can access your content if they want to read more about Syracuse as the game gets closer.
I appreciate that. So Syracuse.com is where you can find my digital work, columns, and the work that I do there. I do a show called Orange Weekly on Thursdays. Similar to how we're doing this show, a video show, which you can see on YouTube and can see on my Twitter feed, Brent Axe Media. That's where I am on Twitter, Brent Axe Media. So come on by. And like I said, if you guys need recommendations or just want to talk ball this week, Come on by. And my radio show is on ESPN Syracuse from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern time. So, and you can watch that on QSportsTalk.com as well. So a lot of stuff to remember there, but plenty of things to come on by and talk some football with. So you guys are welcome to come by any of those.
Yeah, well, Brent, we appreciate it so much. Thanks for taking the time to join us on Nole Your Enemy. It's going to be a fascinating game. Listen, I'm having a hard time getting a feeling for this game this week.
Me too.
As I continue my research and my study, I will get a better feel for it. But I think it's going to be an interesting matchup, and two teams that obviously are looking to up their win total to 7 and up their place in the ACC bowl pecking order. But should be a fascinating week, a weekend for college football again in the ACC and for Florida State, Syracuse. And I want to thank everybody for listening. And we'll be back next week to preview FSU coming back home to take on Louisiana. Brent, thank you. I'm Pat Burnham for the Osceola, and we will see you next week.